Oh, thank you all for having me. It's a real joy and a thrill to be down east again since I grew up, spent first many years, 18, in Grifton, North Carolina, in Pitt County, just next door. And went to Arundel Parrott Academy from third grade to senior year, and then Mars Hill College. I went the other end of the state from here. So I want to thank the Rothermile committee for such great hospitality and amazing gourmet food. So you should get that committee to do more potlucks for you. So I'm here today to talk about, pull together a bunch of different things. I thought, well, I'm going to be in Eastern North Carolina, even though I haven't lived here in a long time, and I want to make some connections that I take with me because this is my home and social location. And in growing up here influences all the work I do in biblical studies and in Christian social ethics and human rights, which are my fields. So Flannery O'Connor talked about the South as the Christ-haunted landscape. And I think about that all the time in Georgia because, you know, she was just down the road from Atlanta in Milledgeville, and there really is, having spent a lot of time in tobacco fields from 12 on up until I could figure out how to get inside a building and have a career. It was a summer job. It wasn't the same as many of the people that I'm going to talk about today in tomatoes and not in tobacco. But that Christ-haunted landscape, I think, affected me growing up in the Episcopal Church, but being very much influenced by the disciples of Christ, and the sort of swirl of Southern evangelicalism that continues in the South. So I've entitled this, Jesus Was a Poor Man, as you can see here. The Bishop William Barber and the Reverend Dr. Liz Thea Harris are the co-founders of the Poor People's Campaign. And I want to, as an aside, mention that Liz Thea Harris went to the same seminary as your terrific pastor, Anna, Union Theological Seminary in New York City. So and at Union, she has founded what is called the Kairos Center. And the Kairos Center and the Poor and Moral Mondays kind of combined, Moral Mondays for 13 years in North Carolina, and with Reverend Barber leading when he was head of the NAACP, out of his church in Goldsboro, where my grandmother is from. So there's all kinds of connections here, and I want to bring it home to North Carolina as I take it globally also. So Jesus was a poor man actually comes from one of the mule trains from Martin Luther King Jr.'s inspired. Of course, he died April 4th, 1968, right before what he had planned in Washington, D.C. that August, which was the Poor People's Campaign. And they set up Resurrection City, a tent city in the mall, and they lobbied for human rights and the dignity of workers. And for them, the focus was on the gospel message. And so I want to take you through some of the connections that I have made for this, and just one little bitty piece of the book that I'm writing this year on sabbatical that is due in a few months, called The Actual Jesus. And that comes from having majored in religion and philosophy at Mars Hill College and taking courses in historical Jesus studies. There's a sense of there's so many quests for the historical Jesus. And I don't know if we'll ever find it, given how far archaeology can take us in ancient manuscripts. But it's interesting to be in dialogue with those academic historical quests, but also, and this is the Christian social ethicist in me, and I have to give credit to my professor, Dr. Glenn Stassen, who was an anti-nuclear activist and among many other things, that you make the connections between the Gospels and real lived experience. And so, here we go, if you're ready. Y'all ready? Okay. First, because I heard that Rothermall was in an interfaith group, and economic justice, and I teach a first-year seminar called Religion and Economic Justice. I have students who do a practicum in another course, and another course I teach called The Bible and Liberation. And they do a practicum experience right across the street from Agnes Scott College in a very gentrified Decatur where you would be hard-pressed to find a house, like a 3-2-bedroom house, for $1 million. And so right across the street is a very, maybe 40-year-old interfaith shelter for the unhoused or homeless women and children. Now it's families. It's called Decatur Cooperative Ministry. And they have a shelter that the students work in. They do tutoring, they serve meals, and other things. And it's called Hagar's House. If you know the story of Hagar, it's very aptly named. It started in an Episcopal church, Sunday school area, and I used to do overnights there. Then they moved to a Methodist church, and now they have since have their own place in a former international youth hostel. And they work on systemic issues also with other organizations in Atlanta, and they work on helping holistically women and children, and also now families, get back on their feet, financial literacy, and other things. And my students get involved in all of those things, sometimes reluctantly and with great reflection on what they think about the homeless and the homeless woman with 5 kids living in her car. And, we have to work through those issues and sort of what's the base of all those kinds of things. So, economic justice in every single religion. And it is hard sometimes to take the message of sacred text on this, I'll be honest. So I'm going to give you just a very rapid overview so we can get back to the Poor People's Campaign. So in Judaism, tzedakah is the justice that God requires out of God's great compassion. It's a reciprocity. So just one passage, and this is a passage that, if you're familiar with Dr. Walter Brueggemann, who taught at Columbia Theological Seminary for years, Hebrew Bible scholar, he did a short exegetical paper for our Agnes Scott Living Wage campaign that I have been a part of since I've been at Agnes Scott College. And it will continue, hopefully not after me. Hopefully we will have some, our end goals will be realized and we'll have some, utopian moments here. But Walter Brueggemann offered this, and the Columbia faculty voted for a living wage in 2005. We had a joint statement between Agnes Scott and Columbia, but okay, it continues. You shall not abuse a needy and destitute laborer, whether a fellow Israelite or a stranger in one of the communities of your land. You must pay out of the wages due on the same day before the sun sets, for the worker is needy and urgently depends on it. Also a cry to the eternal will be issued against you, and you will incur guilt. And so there's a little pressure to be just in your wages, no wage theft, give fair wages. And then in Islam, also heavy thread of economic justice and human rights also, about giving alms to the poor and the needy, but also freeing captives like slaves and giving to debtors in need, for the cause of Allah and the needy travelers, a duty imposed by Allah. Allah is knower and wise. And then in Christianity, there's quite a bit, but I wouldn't say any more than in Judaism or Islam. You've got the main passage, and I want to recommend this classicist new translation. Sarah Rudin has translated the Gospels, and it's a very interesting translation. I was starving, you see, and you gave me something to eat. I was parched, and you gave me something to drink. I was a foreigner, and you took me in. I was naked, and you put clothes on me, ailing, and you looked in on me, in prison, and you came to see me. Then he'll answer them by saying, Amen, I tell you, as far as you didn't do it for a single one of these people here, you are of no importance at all. You didn't do it for me either. And this is from Matthew 25, the passage known traditionally as the parable of the sheep and the goats, but it's not really a parable, it's more of a saying. And this is a main passage that the Poor People's Campaign uses. Also, I'm going to quote Liz Thea Harris here. She did her dissertation at Union in New Testament studies. And I think New Testament studies can be a dangerous field. She says she did her dissertation on the poor will be with you always. And I always thought that meant, okay, well, nothing we can do about it. Because, poor will be with us, nothing we can do. Well, she says, Jesus is quoting Deuteronomy chapter 15, which says there will be no poor person among you if you follow the commandments God is giving today. Jesus isn't condoning poverty. He is reminding us God hates poverty and has commanded us to end poverty by forgiving debts, raising wages, outlawing slavery, and reconstructing society around the needs of the poor. And so the Poor People's Campaign emerged over some, like the Georgia legislature for some, policies that are not in alignment with these kind of gospel principles or this kind of reading of these gospel principles. And the North Carolina legislature also at the time, a few years ago. And so for Liz Thea Harris and William Barber, connecting 1968 and then the 2018 anniversary to continue Martin Luther King Jr.'s vision for a just world. And King, of course, said the arc of the universe bends toward justice, and that is like one of the hottest debated things in Christian social ethics at this current moment. Does it bend toward justice, or do we have to bend it? And Liz Thea Harris and William Barber and the whole movement, including, very proudly, another Agnes Scott alumna, Dr. Colleen Wessel McCoy, who wrote her dissertation on the Poor People's Campaign in '68, and then she works with William Barber and Liz Thea Harris. There are 53 million, approximately, low-income workers in the United States, and they want to stand with those workers. The United Church of Christ has done some very interesting things around human sexuality. If you know their Our Whole Lives curriculum, also, I would say their work on Jesus as a low-wage worker. And they had buttons. Jesus was a low-wage worker, and it relates to the Jesus was a poor man. They are fighting for a living wage for all workers. But it's not, like at Agnes Scott in the Living Wage campaign, it's not just about wages. There are just wages at the top of our list. But our other two priorities are institutional respect and democratic workplace. And those are hard. I mean, you work for a company, my father worked for DuPont in Kinston. It was not democratic. And then everybody got laid off when the plant closed. He was in his mid-50s. But this is, showing workers the dignity that's deserved, and that all work should be offered that kind of dignity. So what's the origins of this? Let's go to Howard Thurman. Howard Thurman is his theology has been resurrected recently. If you have not read Jesus and the Disinherited, I highly recommend it. Buddhist scholars are using this book. Martin Luther King Jr. had Howard Thurman at Morehouse College when he was a student. So he says, Jesus was a poor Jew. If we dare take the position that in Jesus there was at work some radical destiny, it would be safe to say that in his poverty he was more truly Son of Man than he would have been in the incident of family or birth, if the incident of family or birth had made him a rich son of Israel. So looking to the social location of Jesus, which we can't completely know. So to say that Jesus was a poor man, what does it mean? And there's some, like within the last couple of months, some really new research on this that's exciting. So there are only 2 mentions of Jesus or Joseph being a carpenter. And so I want to teach you a little Greek today. And so this is Mark 3, and there's 1 mention in Matthew. Is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary, and brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? Are not his sisters here with us? And it's sort of a slur. Is this not the carpenter? You know, and not a nice way to talk about someone. So the Greek term is tekton, and it's often translated carpenter. That's what I grew up with, and the pictures of Jesus as a carpenter. And then in the Gnostic Gospels, of course, if you've read Infancy Gospel of Thomas, or I don't know, those are popular things around here. They're 2nd century Gospels, spiritual Gospels. Joseph is presented in one Gospel as a very lousy carpenter. And he's asked to build a throne for some political official. And he can't get the boards right. They don't fit. So enter young Jesus, child Jesus, to stretch the boards miraculously to fit. So, but tekton can mean all these things. Builder, construction worker, stonemason. If you've read the book Lamb, the Gospel according to Biff, Jesus' best friend. That novel, which I use in my Jesus in History and Culture class, it's quite humorous but well-researched. And there's a thin line between carpenter and stonemason in that. So if you were a builder or a stonemason, well, especially a stonemason, you had to use mud and manure to fit things together. And so it was quite smelly, and you didn't want to be around those people because they stunk. So I mentioned this book this morning, Candida Moss's God's Ghostwriters. She says that the tekton were part of a class of marginalized workers who were the very thin line between them and slaves in the ancient world. And her book is about the scribes who wrote the New Testament. You know, Paul's amanuensis or scribe. When Paul says, here, I write this in my own hand, he's had a scribe as he's making tents or leather or whatever he's making. And he's, stream of consciousness in the book of Romans, I think, in his theology, and he's got someone writing, and that person was probably an educated slave in the Roman world. And so tekton and slaves. Now, I walk every week with a friend of mine who's a stroke survivor, a year out, doing fantastic, 10,000 steps 3 times a week now. We started going to the end of the block and back. This is really good. And that was last fall. Well, she is Professor Mitzi Smith of Columbia Theological Seminary, one of the leading New Testament scholars in the country, so I feel really privileged to be able to throw out stuff to her because she is writing a book on the Gospel of Luke where she goes, the Magnificat, where Mary says, I'm a slave of God. then she says, well, maybe Jesus was a slave. And I say, well, we can't know. But, well, anyway, there's some things you can't, most things you cannot know for sure, but you can't not know. So if he was a carpenter, he was or a stonemason or whatever kind of craftsman, very thin line is the point. So I've already talked about the connection between King and 1968 and 2018, bringing that to the present because King's vision was not fulfilled. And if you, many of you may know the whole history of Martin Luther King's life better than I do, but when he made a turn toward economic justice and the structures that keep that in place, and then also to militarism, and the Vietnam War was when he started getting more death threats, and the rest of that is history. So King had an economic Bill of Rights, and I teach human rights in the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, and all the good work Eleanor Roosevelt pulled together for that to happen. I was one of the founders of the Human Rights Minor at Agnes Scott. So this is, you can read for yourself, King's Economic Bill of Rights, a few of the things. And this seems very idealistic still. We haven't gotten there. And I think if we could I tell my students, is just start where you are in our classroom. Who cleans the floors? Who paints the walls? Who fixes the electric lights? Who does the tech work? And then let's go out to the dining hall, and all that's all been outsourced. So we kind of did a deep dive, nose dive, I think. But however, so we go out from there to the city of Decatur and then on. We make the connections with us and others in the world. And so that's what King was doing, starting with his own space. Then the Poor People's Campaign, I only picked out two. They have an incredibly long list. You go to their website, they have 40-page documents on this. They've done a lot of research, and their theology is not for a lot of people because it is really it picks the hardest part of the gospel and puts it up, so you have to look at it. And it's easier to not think about these things. So they say, we believe that people should not live in or die from poverty in the richest nation ever to exist, and not to blame the poor, but to focus on those structures that keep this poverty in place. And then, of course, they point to systemic racism as one of the key factors here. And that's broadly conceived as not just black-white, but with immigrants, asylum seekers, refugees. And what keeps poverty and economic inequality in place. So King, there are many, many quotes from King on this. This was, when he was assassinated in Memphis, what was he there for? The Memphis sanitation workers strike. I am a man. So for Thea Harris and Barber to wear Jesus was a poor man is a way of saying these people are human beings who are poor and not to be blamed. So approaching it from another way. And so King was declaring a war on poverty. And of course, a nonviolent direct action because of his, he learned nonviolence from both Howard Thurman and from Gandhi. Okay. And from his Nobel Peace Prize, he thinks that poverty he thought that poverty was a moral evil. And if you've heard William Barber, he picks up on that theme and runs with it. Almost 2/3 of the peoples of the world go to bed hungry each night. And so it has to do with school, education, opportunity. It's an intersection of classism and educational opportunity and racism and a lot of different things. So, okay, and back to Barber. I'll read you another quote from Barber where he does some Greek. Disciples of Christ minister strikes again. Whether you believe in Jesus eternally, you ought to at least believe in him historically, because Jesus' first sermon, and this is in Luke in Nazareth, when he gets run out of town and they're going to throw him off the cliff. So you preach about this, you could get run out of town and thrown off the cliff. Okay. He wanted to preach the good news to the poor, and the word there is tokos. It's a Greek word which means preach good news to those who have been made poor by the social structures that create their poverty in the first place, and give them the courage to stand up against it. Now, of course, he's moved to Yale. They have a big institute up there now. And that's kind of a hard one for me, that he left Goldsboro. It just, anyway. So there's a film, and I presented on this film in a Bible and film section at the Society of Biblical Literature about 1.5 years ago. And these are the people who do Bible and film, especially, written books on Jesus and film. They'd never heard of the film. There was really no discussion because they were like, oh, thanks for telling us about it, but I love this film. Milo Rao is the director. He's done theater and film. And he was asked to come to Matera, Italy, which is in the southern eastern part, where all the tomato farms are. It's also the city that looks like Jerusalem. It has the same kind of curve. And 2018, Matera was named European Capital of Europe. And they asked him to come and make a film. Well, Milo Rao's hero was Paolo Pasolini, the famous Italian film director who did The Gospel According to St. Matthew in 1964 and did the film in Matera. Well, so many Jesus films there. Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ, and then the most recent Book of Clarence, which is fun, I think. And they use the part of the old city. They have to be real careful because a lot of it's been modernized now. And so you'll see just one certain section in the films. But so he went because to do another Jesus film. Pasolini used local actors. It's a very moody black and white film. Pasolini's Jesus was a Marxist, socialist, social democratic Jesus. And so the Jesus from the Pasolini film plays John the Baptist in the new gospel film. And you can get it on Amazon, just if you're in. You can't stream it though. And you have to have a particular kind of player because it's a European film. Because he's the director Swiss, and he lives in Belgium, and it gets complicated. So he went down there to look for local actors, like Pasolini did. And what did he find were African asylum seekers who had made the and survived the very dangerous crossing across the Mediterranean and worked on mafia-run tomato farms. So now when I go to the grocery store looking for my Italian certain kind of tomatoes, I have to take a breath. You know, I think ignorance is bliss sometimes. And this film kind of killed a lot of my ignorance. So he gets down there to do sort of a tribute to Pasolini, and he winds up doing a hybrid film, half Bible, half documentary. And some of it works better than others, but it's really interesting because what you'll notice in the film clip I'm about to show you is you'll see tourists with cell phones. You'll see local actors who have auditioned to be part of the crowd. You'll see Jesus and the disciples, who are played by African asylum seekers. Jesus, played by Yves Sagnier, is Cameroonian. He's Roman Catholic. All the disciples are Muslim. There's a scene in the film where the director shows them Pasolini's film. It's really a fascinating film. And here you can see from this picture, they're setting up the scene of the Last Supper on one of the tomato farms. And one of the things that the film was able to do was to, the police, Italian police, had torn down one of the shanty towns or slums where the farm workers lived, very deplorable conditions. And they helped with the Roman Catholic Church and others to rebuild it. Okay, so let's see if we can show this. Out of this, the guy who plays Jesus, the Cameroonian, he started a movement in 2011 called the Revolt of Dignity, and I'll take you through a little bit of that. So, let's see if I can get the tech right. Okay. This is his movement. You can see even from this picture, I don't know, that woman in the front, she's just a local who got in. The city got very excited about this film and very engaged. The mayor auditioned. They wanted him to play Pilate, but he said no, because it wouldn't look good as a politician. So he played Simon of Cyrene. The woman, the mother, the profession, they were some professional actors. The actress who played Jesus' mother in Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ plays the mother here. You'll see her face in this scene. And Pilate's a professional actor. But the Catholic priest you're going to see is the real deal. And I use this scene in my actual Jesus movie because he knows he's not the actual Jesus, sort of. There's a liminal space there, and you'll see it in just a minute. Okay. Is the light supposed to be on this? I'm not sure it is, but we'll see.
Bravo! E allora siete voi colpevoli, siete voi. Siete voi.
Jesus comes. He died for us. He loved us each personally, and for that reason we love him. If we pray to him, he responds immediately in the same second, because he don't need time and space. He is here now. If one or two or three people coming in my name, I am there. He is now here. Christos enviat. Hallelujah. God bless you. God bless you. God bless you.
In posizione.
Basta! Oggi è Pasqua. E come ogni Pasqua libererò un carcerato. Chi volete che liberi? Barabba? O Gesù, detto il Cristo? A morte al Chi volete che liberi? Barabba o Gesù detto il Cristo? Cosa ha fatto di male?
Ha bestemmiato!
Sulla croce al negro! Sia crocifisso! Siete voi i responsabili di quel sangue di un uomo giusto. Io sono innocente.
Costui era con Gesù il Galileo.
Non so cosa vuoi dire.
Sì, è vero. Tu eri fra quelli. Il tuo accento ti tradisce.
Lo giuro, in nome di Dio vivente, non lo conosco quell'uomo.
Okay. So what I did was to connect more what's going on in Italy with the farm worker movement. And their cleansing of the temple is a scene in a grocery store where they're taking tomatoes and smashing them with their feet, much to horrified customers in the background. And so this is a scene on the left from the New Gospel and of Jesus's bloody shirt with crown of thorns. And on the right is from the Coalition for Immokalee Workers in Immokalee, Florida. If you're familiar with the Fair Food movement, Reverend Noel D'Amico has done a lot of work with this from the Presbyterian Church. The bloody shirt of Tomas, age 16, when he asked for water in the fields and was beaten by his supervisor when he went and got water anyway. So these two movements are connected. Revolt of Dignity has demands, that are pretty basic. United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, and the Martin Luther King's economic justice rights. So the right to humane working conditions and fair pay and good living conditions and human dignity. And so with the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, and there's a new film just out, there's Food Inc. and Food Inc. Incorporated 2 that's about this. Coalition of Immokalee Workers centers around, like the movement in Italy, worker-driven social responsibility is what it's called on this side of the Atlantic. And their code of conduct that is about health and safety and has to deal a lot with things like human trafficking, sexual assault, a lot of things. And so in Italy, the movement is called No Cap. Caporelli it's like the corporals that work for the mafia, even though, those farms, it's a system that is really embedded. And it's not just that system that is the problem. But there are many churches and human rights groups in Italy. It's not just African asylum seekers, it's, seasonal workers from Bulgaria and Romania too also. And then in the USA, it's the Fair Food movement, which McDonald's, Walmart, have signed on to. Others like Kroger haven't. And even if you sign on, if you look too carefully, you might find some cracks in that system. So, we're out of time. I'm going to bring it home to Craven County. I was shocked by this. I thought, oh, it won't cost as much to live in Craven County as it does in Atlanta. So, but prices are rising. So what is a living wage? At Agnes Scott now, after many years, we're sort of 15 an hour, sort of, depends. But then there's some worker rights in there, especially with the outsourcing. So a living wage. This is the Massachusetts Institute of Technology Family Budget Calculator. You can look at the Economic Policy Institute's Family Budget Calculator and get a similar, almost identical take on this. So, kind of look at your category, how many children, how many income earners, what does it take to have a living wage, not a, take a cruise kind of wage. This is just the basics. Most of Agnes Scott's staff live pretty far out and have to have transportation to come in. And that's a whole nother thing I can talk about at another time. But just to bring it home, I don't know the situation of farm workers in North Carolina since I haven't been here or worked on a farm here in way too many years. And when I did, I was not one of the sharecroppers that I could see their houses across the field. So what does all this mean for justice and economic justice, and where to find Jesus? The Italian Jesus, who's from Cameroon, or Jesus? And so the Poor People's Campaign is a call to a national revival, to pay attention to these things, to call for real policy changes. And this is happening in faith communities. The movement is, you name the faith, they are there in the crowd and working to create a religious justice that is against a religious nationalism and privileges the voices and dignity of the workers. So where do you find Jesus? In the midst of all of that. So, thank you. I think we're going to take a short break. You're going to do questions, and then we'll come back and do the questions. So thank you.
Well, we have a few questions that you guys have put together. Thank you very much. And I'm going to turn this over to Linda Staunch, a member of the Rotherham Board, who's going to pose the questions to Dr. Pippin.
That is in direct opposition to answering the questions, because I can't do that. But I'm glad to have all of you here, and those of you with your thoughtful questions, we appreciate it very much. I will try to address them as well as I can, and then turn it right over to our expert guest. And I'll try to bring some together as much as possible. The first one I would ask is, how would you address income equality if poverty is such an issue? Inequality. Thank you. Inequality. Thank you very much. Let me do that again. How would you address income inequality if poverty is such an issue? That's the first question.
Oh, okay. Yes, great question. I wish I was an economist. Yeah, that's really difficult because of, what?
Either hold it right here or speak up, please.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, it's very difficult, of course. Small businesses always balk. My college does also, because we have, a limited resources. How do we pay people just wages when we don't have the money to do it? So I don't know. Does anyone have any policy work on this? I know William Barber and all, if you look at their material, have some kind kind of utopian vision for this, but the on-the-ground stuff is really difficult right now. So, because I know for new PhDs in my field starting out make about what, almost the same or less than DeKalb County school teachers with a master's degree. And so, because of the nature of higher education funding, so it's, you know, it's a higher, more livable wage, but still, it's difficult. So I'm not answering the question because I don't know how to do that. I mean, I can say we need more wages, but it's not just wages. It's connected to other things.
Okay, and I think that's a very thoughtful answer for something we all need to consider. The second one would be, who are the others in our society? Are they migrant workers, undocumented workers, minorities, women, all of the above?
Yeah, I think you answered it, Linda. It's all of the above. Well, if you saw in the video, the response the crowd gave was very racist and xenophobic. Kill the filthy black. And that was, put into the film on purpose because of the racism and xenophobia in Italy now that I didn't know about till I could have guessed, but until I saw this film. And what you have here is a black Jesus that James Cone, who's the father of black liberation theology, professor at Union Theological Seminary, figures prominently in justice movements. And also someone who's teaching there now, the Episcopal priest, Reverend Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas. I recommend you read. She has a book called The Black Christ. And so the connections are made between Jesus, asylum seekers, George Floyd, the Black Lives Matter movement, children detained at the border. It's, anyone who has been denied human dignity.
Very good. This kind of might go along with that. What is the Poor People's Campaign in North Carolina accomplishing?
Well, what I did, I found the material from that campaign, which if you didn't get is in the back. I did a handout for you from their fact sheet. And you may see some points on there that, you think are true or not true. You can argue with it. I am part of the Georgia Poor People's Campaign, and it's largely based out of Oakhurst Baptist Church in Decatur, where my husband goes and is occasional interim pastor when the ministers go on sabbatical. And it is a church that started Seeds magazine and back in the 80s, which is a anti-hunger or food and it was to fight food insecurity. And it also, that church helped to found the Baptist Peace Fellowship, which is based at Camp Junaluska in a building and also has relations globally with places like the Baptist Seminary, Matanzas, Cuba. So there are global connections to statewide movements, and I think the North Carolina campaign is a lot stronger than the Georgia campaign just because William Barber was based here. And the Moral Monday movement was so strong. A lot of religion professors were in that movement, especially from Elon College and university now. So I think what they're trying to achieve is to get public recognition and media attention to the issues. Barber, of course, was a MacArthur Fellow. And that's like super famous to get all that money. And so he's in the news, and they are well organized and thoughtful and prayerful and continuing, the work of not the civil rights campaign that for Martin Luther King became a human rights campaign toward the end of his life. So I think they're raising awareness, and they are also building leadership, that worker-driven social responsibility that the Immokalee workers have. The Poor People's Campaign is also based on that who knows more about poverty and how to change it than those who are in it. And to use those, and to honor and respect those voices in their campaign, and to privilege them, put them front and center.
I'll stand over here. The Presbyterian Church USA just did a national book study on poverty, and they've written action guidelines for churches. Do you think the church is the center to fight for resolution of poverty? Can they be rebels and demand organizations try to support economic justice?
That is a great question, too. I think knowing Reverend Noelle D'Amico and her work with Fair Food and others, it is one important piece of a larger movement. And I see from your bulletin, you're doing so much locally in terms of charity work and helping people who are needy. So how much can one church do? That's what the Poor People's Movement is about. One church, one person can't do it. But if you build these coalitions, and they're building them across religions, they're doing it interfaith, they're doing it, and they're trying to set up campaigns in every single state, and really call us back to what they see as the moral principles of this country. And of course, that's hotly in debate. November 2024, you're going to vote which way you think on these issues. And Barber is strongly on one side, and there are others who would argue and read the Gospels quite differently, right? So, and so how one church cannot go to the North Carolina legislature and demand change, right? And even Barber and his movement, people got arrested, civil disobedience. That's tough. And to come to that kind of decision and to have that kind of moral courage, and people have different roles in the movement, right? And you have to determine, those who are in it, what is my role? What I can do, what I can't do. I have young kids, I have elderly parents, or both. I work 2 jobs, whatever, but you can do something in the movement. And for the Poor People's Campaign, it's raising consciousness. Be aware that this is systemic and structural. So that's their main point. They do want to move people out and make change by being seen. So.
Very good. Okay. Are you addressing the connection between literacy and poverty in your book? This is from someone who's working with the Literacy Council locally and would like to know the answer.
Not necessarily in my book, but I think, of course, literacy, as we know from slavery, and this movement, and something I didn't talk about that I talk about in the chapter on the film, is what's happening in Italy. The farm workers are called the new slavery, or modern slavery. That's also called that by the Immokalee workers. And some people raise objection. Well, it's not slavery because it's Civil War happened, but there are. If you define slavery as lacking freedom of movement, as being in debt to the owners because of the living situation, no freedom of travel, no days off, no voice, then, and also there were 2 cases in Georgia in the last decade where agribusiness, not agriculture, 2 agribusiness farms were indicted on human rights abuses and human trafficking. So that's really the new slavery, but there's a continuum of that.
Thank you. Okay, this would be kind of a challenging theological question. Is it mutually exclusive to be a middle-class American and a follower of Jesus?
Oh. Yeah, I know y'all are thinking that one through. As a middle-class follower of Jesus, may I say, I think it is possible, but how much guilt are we carrying? I don't know. I am. I'm being challenged all the time, and I feel with Jesus studies, since I do Jesus studies, not just apocalyptic studies, but they do overlap, that if I'm not being challenged, I'm really not paying attention. I get complacent. It's really easy to get complacent because I get tired and I don't want to hear one more new thing that's going to shake my foundation, right? But I think when I hear William Barber and Liz Thearis, it's like, whoa, okay, I need to start paying better attention to how what my life is, not just the tomatoes I buy in the store, which I do pay attention to now more than I did before, or the strawberries or blueberries, bring it home around here this time of year. What are the working conditions of the people who work those farms? Pick cotton in eastern North Carolina now. I see a lot of cotton fields. What do you know about that? How can you know it? Who knows it that can tell you about it and bring those folks in? So it's always being educated. You never get to the end of it, but to lift up the folks who are actually doing the work in a way that's not, paternalistic, but really honoring those voices. And I know they're being connected with the North Carolina Poor People's Campaign, having them come and speak, getting an argument with them, it's just all part of the growth of faith. Or what Dietrich Bonhoeffer would say, there's cheap grace and there's costly grace, right? What's the costly grace challenge for us to make? I like cheap grace, actually, but this challenges me. Wake up, right? And of course, there are those in this country now. We're really fighting the battle. Like if you're, they say, well, we don't want to be woke, right? Then this would be being woke. So you have to, decide where you are. There's not a side. There's like multiple positions, right?
Thank you. We'll conclude with a question and an answer, and I'll ask your comments on both, okay? First, the question is from someone, what will it take for the middle-class white people to hear your message? And then the answer that is proposed in another card is, when the power of love is greater than the love of power, we will see change. We have to see and talk and serve Christ in everyone. Would you comment on those two?
Okay. Well, the last one, you're correct. That is absolutely the answer to the other one. Yeah, I don't know. What's it take for me to hear it? I get comfortable in my positions just because I've spent so much energy getting there, and I'm constantly repacking my backpack of knowledge. And it depends on where I put myself. I have to put myself certain places. So I thought I would never put myself back on any kind of agricultural anything after working in tobacco in the summer. And then I think I mentioned this last night. I'm going to be with a grant from the Wabash Center for Teaching Theology and Religious Studies, very gracious grant, going to be taking students to the Metro State Transitional Center. It's a transitional center for women felons at the end of their served time. And Trellis Horticultural Therapy Alliance has an organic farm and a farmer. The last one was seminary trained. I haven't met the new one, but I'm going to be working there some this summer, is setting it up for the next 2 years. And we're going to be studying prison education and organic farming and horticultural therapy and just getting to know and be with the women, which is the most important part of it, and learn from them. So it's placing yourself geographically in a place. And I know many here have traveled internationally and done that, but there are plenty of places right here, just very close, to do that. And to do that with, as I look around in my classroom now, from when Anna was there, it was very different demographics. Now, it's majority students of color, African American predominantly. That changes the sources I use, what I have to learn to keep up. And plus the field has changed. Slowly, creepy crawly, but it's changing. So, and I'm talking about New Testament studies. Still dominated by middle class white males. But it's changing. And the new stuff coming out, some middle class white males are doing it, but it's a great conversation that's happening with folks from the South Pacific and Korea and South Korea and Africa, and that kind of interfaith, intergeographical dialogue. I mean, we have to step outside our comfort zones, right? And that's difficult.
Thank you very much. I think you'll agree that this has been a stimulating and provocative way to spend your afternoon, and we thank you for attending. I want to also just remind you that these cards don't have just questions, but if you'll turn on the back and you're interested, if you are a newcomer and are not on our mailing list, give us your email address and we will put you on our mailing list for all the future programs. We hope you'll come back. And if you will join me in thanking our speaker for your time, your thoughts, your study, and for being with us today. A big round of applause.